Hello, my name is Eberhardt Kuhn. I am a marketing manager at Shimadzu Scientific Instruments, and I'll be talking about Know What You Grow, a closer look at cannabis and hemp testing. No matter what job I do, I always want to have the right tool for the right job. So I could take a hammer to drive this screw into a piece of wood, but I wouldn't do that. I could use an adjustable wrench, which probably works a little better, but still, wouldn't a screwdriver ultimately be the better choice? Or better yet, a cordless drill if I had to do a lot of screws. Of course, that's not the only thing I'm ever going to do. So in my toolbox, I don't just have one tool, I have multiple tools. And the same is true in a cannabis lab. So you can see here there are a lot of different analyses that people do with cannabis, such as potency or terpenes, to pesticides and heavy metals. And each one of those tests, each one of those analyses has a best tool. So here's your toolbox, if you will. So this is what a modern cannabis QC lab will look like. And you can do these type of tests these are the 7 most common tests that people do, which is the potency profiling, which is the cannabinoids, and the terpene profiling, but also pesticide screening, residual solvents, heavy metals, mycotoxin, and finally moisture content. So let's go around the lab and see what each of those tools will do for us. So let's start with our HPLC for cannabinoids or potency. Now you can have an HPLC like the one on the left with lots of plumbing and tubes going around, or you can have a nice compact unit like the one on the right, which we call the Cannabis Analyzer, that has everything self-contained in itself. And it has, a program that gives you a nice output with all the information on your sample, chromatograms, and so forth. And then it gives you nice quantitative results. So you can have all your cannabinoids individually, or you can have a total for the THC and the total of CBD. And you can customize these reports. But that's the nice thing is you have a dedicated instrument that does the analysis and then gives you a nice, concise data report. Now, there are 3 modes of operation. There is one, it's the high throughput mode, which if you need to really crank through a lot of samples, then there is the high sensitivity mode, which is the one that's most used in most of the cannabis labs. And then there's the high resolution one that's really more for R&D purposes. So if you are looking at a new cultivar, for instance, and you're trying to see the high sensitivity one, like I said, is the most popular one because it gives you a good trace level determination. So 4 years ago, this is what you might have seen with the high throughput method. And you get 10 cannabinoids in 8 minutes. With the high sensitivity method, you get 11 cannabinoids in 10 minutes. And with the high resolution minutes, you get 11 cannabinoids in 30 minutes. Now, it's a little longer runtime, but you can see that you have perfect baseline resolution of all the cannabinoids. Now, that was 4 years ago. Since then, things have changed. The lists have grown, as you all know, but also some of the technology has evolved. So today, we can do 18 cannabinoids in the high resolution method, and actually do it in a little bit less time. The high throughput method, again, we stayed the same at 8 minutes, but we nearly double the number of cannabinoids that can be run in that same time. And like I said, for our most popular one, the high sensitivity method today, it is 21 cannabinoids, and it's a little bit longer, but you can see that you can get very nice quantitation of these 21 cannabinoids. So the point is that 4 years ago compared to today, so there are some changes. So what's nice with the Cannabis Analyzer is that you have the software and you get updates to the software that then allow you to always have the right method for the latest requirements for the number of cannabinoids. And the other nice thing is you can actually look at it from your smartphone. You can check the system status, the chromatogram progress. So from your smartphone, you could be anywhere and take a look at your analysis. Okay, now let's move over to our GCMS, and now we'll look at terpenes. There are a lot of terpenes in cannabis. Over 200 have been found so far, and there is some synergistic effect that you get with the cannabinoids. It's often called the entourage effect. Now, terpenes are part of a larger family of compounds known as essential oils. And essential oils are used in aromatherapy. So in and by themselves, terpenes already have a health benefit, and if you combine that with the health benefit of the cannabinoids, you get that holistic cannabis experience by having the cannabinoids and the terpenes with their entourage effect. So let's look at this particular cultivar that has 22% THC, and then it has some terpenes there, pinene and caryophyllene. And those percentages, the 40 and 25%, are not of the total flower. That's actually of the terpene content. But the pinene, as you can see here, it's got anti-inflammatory, antibacterial effects, so it does offer those additional health benefits. Compare that to this cultivar. That's the same male, different female. So you have about the same THC, 24%. But you have a different terpene profile. In this case, you have myrcene, which is the predominant terpene, and it's a sedative and anti-insomnia. So it will give you a much more relaxing experience than the previous cultivar would have. So the terpenes play a big role in how the cannabis interacts with your body. So for analysis, again, we use our headspace GC or GCMS, and we can do very nicely. This is a list of, I think, 38 terpenes that you can see they're very nicely resolved and analyzed and quantitative. Okay, so moving on now to residual solvents. In this case, we're using a headspace GC. So like many of the analyses in the cannabis, it's a list-based approach. So in this case, we're looking at the Oregon list, which is about 35 residual solvents. And you can see with our headspace GC, we can very easily separate those 35 residual solvents. And we can even do the California list, which is 20 residual solvents. And you can see here very nicely, again, excellent resolution, good quantitation. In the picture, you actually see a headspace GCMS. And you can actually combine that. If you have the headspace GCMS, then you can do the terpenes and the residual solvents in a single run. So you can actually use the same tool, but do two different types of analysis. So you get a 2-for-1 special, if you will. Okay, next we'll move to our ICPMS, which we will use to analyze for heavy metals. Why do we worry about heavy metals? Well, plants in general bioaccumulate metals from the soil. And hemp and cannabis is really no exception to that. And that can be positive because you can get good nutrients from the soil, and you can get good metals, if you will, potassium, iron, calcium, and things. But at the same time, you also get some of the toxic metals. And in this case, we want to analyze them by ICPMS, inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometry. And usually when people talk about heavy metals, they talk about the big four: lead, cadmium, mercury, and arsenic. And the regulatory agencies like the USP and the FDA, they established permissible daily exposure limits. And you can see those here in table 1, for the arsenic, cadmium, lead, and mercury. And they're in the low ppm range. So when we did the analysis of a cannabis flower, we compared that to those limits. So on the bottom row now of table 2, you can see those limits from table 1 for comparison then to the matrix. And you can see in the top row, when we look at matrix, that the levels we found in the cannabis flower are actually significantly below the admissible daily exposure limit. So we don't need to worry about heavy metals in that particular cannabis flower. Okay, now we'll turn to our LCMS triple quad in the front here. And first we'll use it to analyze for pesticides. Like any crop, cannabis is susceptible to attacks by pests and little bugs. So people use pesticides to protect the crop. And then we'll have to analyze for those pesticides. Historically, much of the pesticide analysis was done by GC-MS/MS, but more recently, a lot of it has shifted towards LC-MS triple quad. And it has to do with the volatility of the pesticides, the polarity of the pesticides, but more pesticides are amenable to LC than there are to GC. And in fact, we can do hundreds of pesticides with LC-MS/MS. So you can see here, 211 pesticides, very easily done with an LC-MS triple quad. The bigger challenge really is keeping up with the ever-evolving pesticide lists. As you can see here, each state has a different list, and it started in Colorado and got to Oregon at 59, and then California said, well, Oregon, I'll see your 59 and I'll raise you to 66. And then Canada goes 66, well, we can do 96. So Canada starting a list of 96 pesticides. And then currently, AOAC International is working on a list of 104 pesticides. And not only is it a larger list of more compounds, but they're also looking to lower the limit of quantitation and the limit of residue detection. So the point I'm making is that these lists are expected to continue to evolve. The laboratory capabilities change, instrument capabilities change, risk assessments, regulations, laws. So keep an eye on that rather than worry about whether the instrument can handle it. The instrument can. If you have an LC triple quad MS, it can handle 104, it can handle 204. So, but just make sure that you are aware of which list you are running. Just like with the GCMS, with the headspace, we can do a second analysis with the LCMS triple quad. In this case, we're looking at mycotoxins. So mycotoxins and their carcinogenic type aflatoxins, they're a type of mold that is present in a lot of plants, including cannabis. And so there's testing required for the 4 aflatoxins, B1, B2, G1, and G2. And then there's also mycotoxin, ochratoxin A, that needs to be analyzed in most cases. What's nice is, as I mentioned, because we already did the pesticides on the LCMS, we can do those combined. So in this case, you see that we have the Oregon pesticide list plus the mycotoxins plus the aflatoxins all in a single run. Now, if you need a little more sensitivity for the aflatoxins and mycotoxins, then a conventional HPLC with the fluorescence detector will give you a little better sensitivity down to the single-digit part per billion range, as you can see here in the table where we quantitated the data. Okay, so now let's look at moisture testing. That's our little moisture testing is sitting there in the corner. Mold and bacteria can really thrive in a moist environment. And of course, we don't want that, especially in prolonged storage. And the data have shown that the molds can really proliferate when the moisture level exceeds 12%. So with a moisture balance, you can very easily determine the moisture level. And what's nice about this test too is that it is non-destructive, meaning that you can do a moisture analysis test and then take the product and put it back on the shelf. Just have to make sure, especially if you're going to store the product for any length of time, I have to assure that the total moisture content is less than 12%. Otherwise, you could run the danger of seeing some mold growth. And now for something completely different, brought to you by the Ministry of Silly Walks. A convenient and tasty way to enjoy or administer cannabinoids is through edibles. And they could be, the brownies, cookies, and everything, and the ever popular gummy bears. Now, edibles are then a type of food, and texture in food is quite important. And we have a certain perception of texture, and it's based on, maybe a prior experience. So if you look at the popcorn, we have a certain expectation when we buy popcorn, or those nuts on the bottom right. We want them to be hard and, like a peanut be a little softer than an almond, for instance. When you take a bite of an apple, there's a certain texture that you expect. You don't want it to be mealy and soft, but kind of crisp and juicy. And even when it comes to chocolate, a chocolate cake, for instance, you want that to be soft and moist, while a piece of chocolate, you want that to be a little firm and dry, of course. And then, of course, the gummies, you have a certain expectation on the chewiness of the gummies. So texture is actually a sensory property of a food. And there was a scientist, Dr. Lena Szczesniak, who developed this texture profile analysis. And so she correlated some of these characteristics like hardness, adhesiveness, elastic quality to certain sensory experiences that someone will have eating the food. And we can actually quantitate that. So we can do a texture profile analysis, and it's basically looking at the mechanical properties by taking a food. In this case, we have these samples of edibles, the gummies, and you can see in the middle picture, you have the gummy, you have the plunger come down, and then it started to squish the gummy. I mean, I love these instruments because they're so fun to watch. You can actually see what's happening. But we squish the gummy, deform it, and then there is a lot of math and algorithms that happen behind the scenes. And you can then get quantitative output of characteristics like hardness, cohesiveness, chewiness. And you don't need to worry about any of that math or anything. That's all part of the software, and it does all that behind the scenes. But then you get a nice quantitative output. And that's really important if you're developing a new edible and you're trying out new additives, new formulations. And this gives you a way to quantify, get a number for what the consumer then may describe it as soft or hard or chewy. So you can see that here, and this becomes important. So in this case, we're looking at two different brands of medicated gummies. And you can see that brand B has a higher firmness and chewiness compared to brand A. So if you think about what that means, is that you have to chew brand B longer to get it into a consistency that's suitable for swallowing. So it's the mastication. And excuse me, that may not be as critical if it's, say, for recreational use for adults. But if this is a medicated gummy that's prescribed to, say, a small child, then that process of chewing it and breaking it down to a consistency where the child can swallow it, that becomes more important. And so it's nice to know that you can quantitate that ahead of time as part of your product development. Now, this is a test that's not typical for your cannabis labs, but I just wanted you to be aware of that there is a instrumentation that allows you to quantitate the texture of the edibles. So, which then brings me back to having the right tool for the right job. There's these 7 analyses. The color-coded here, the ones in the dark blue at the top, those are the desirable constituents, ingredients of the cannabis, the cannabinoids and the terpenes. The ones in reds are the ones that you don't want in there, but you still have to check for them. And then, of course, you have the moisture at the end. Point being, there's a right tool for any of these type 7 analyses. And some of the tools can be used multiple times, like the LC-MS, pesticides, mycotoxins, or the GCMS for the terpenes and the residual solvents. So that's all I have for today. I want to thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at erkuhn@shimadzu.com, or you can go to www.growyourlab.com, and you'll find a lot of good information about cannabis and hemp analysis on that website. And with that, again, I want to thank you, and bye-bye.